Hello everyone, it's Old Guardian here. Hearthstone had a major balance patch right before Christmas and there were some interesting changes. Paladin was nerfed, Rainbow Mage had the Arcane Worm nerfed, for example. Quite a few changes. Now, some time has passed, the meta has started to stabilize a little bit and it is a very different meta than it was before Christmas. There's not that much evolution in the decks themselves, even in the nerf decks. Like Rainbow Mages, Paladins, the decks themselves have not really changed, but there are some new archetypes that have become more powerful, and because the power levels have changed, then that has had more of an effect on the meta. So let's take a look at the top 16 best Hearthstone decks right now, coming for the new year, and decks that you can play all the way up to Legend. And coming at number 16 we have that Rainbow Mage. Rainbow Mage Arcane Worm was nerfed, but only very slightly, so no changes to the list as such, although the stronger Rainbow Mage variant right now is the one that runs double elemental inspiration. Previously the strongest variant used to be the one that only focuses on that Sif OTK, but now also having access to some board has been useful in the current meta for Rainbow Mage. And at number 15 we have Naga Priest. Naga Priest is currently the strongest priest archetype, although Undead Priest is still around there. We have Automaton Priests, we have Control Priests, but none of them are really established. We don't have a very good sample of those, other than Undead Priest, which you can see that it's performing well in very low ranks, but then it really starts to fall down as we get to Diamond. However, Naga Priest is doing a much more steadier job. Naga Priest appears much more prominently when you look at various like meta lists. Okay, tier 1, tier 2 decks, Naga Priest seems to be pretty high, but the explanation for that is that Naga Priest lists are quite uniform. There's not many different types of Naga Priest lists. Then again, if you look at something else, then many other archetypes have much more internal variation, and some of those lists are doing worse, some of those lists are better, but Naga Priest is just pretty much all the same, and it's this list. And it's a fine list as such, no worries in that regard, but overall its power level is quite mediocre when you compare it to the best versions of other archetypes. At number 14 we have Highlander Blood Death Knight, one of the more fun Highlander control archetypes currently in the game, and this shows a little bit of a peculiarity in the current meta. This is a control deck. This should be like the deck that, okay, if you try to get on the board and beat somebody on the board, then yeah, control deck is going to ruin you unless you have some really big bombs to drop. And Treant Druid doesn't, but Blood Death Knight is still weak against Treant Druid. Treant Druid currently is just so fast that it can go under most control decks, which has not really happened that often in Hearthstone. But right now, Highlander Blood Death Knight, you'd think this would be great because there's so many Treant Druids around, but actually it's not, because it cannot even reliably defend against Treant Druid. Other than that, it is still a fine deck, Highlander deck, so the game is really different from other games, and there's plenty to play around, plenty to play with, fun deck overall. Performance-wise, kind of mediocre, but still legend capable. And at number 13 we have something new, because there's Sludge Warlock. The buff to Sludge and buff to Popcar the Putrid has resulted in a bunch of experimentation with Warlock, and this seems to be the strongest variant. There's a couple of approaches that you can take. There's the Sludge approach, like just this kind of very aggressive approach. This could be even more impish if you wanted it to be, could have raw farm in it. That's one way to build this deck. It can be like this, pretty aggressive, using those sludges in an aggressive fashion. It can also be an OTK style of deck. Typically nowadays you run Thaddeus in that kind of Warlock deck. So you have Thaddeus and then you make your sludge and stuff free, and then you just vomit out so much sludge in a single turn that the opponent just crumbles. And out of those options, this seems to be the best performing one. Just aggressive, very low curve, and just going for that win. Number 12 we have Arcane Hunter. Arcane Hunter is just a very steady performer. Arcane Hunter's biggest problem right now in the current meta is that it is weak against Treant Druid as well. And yeah, so many Treant Druids, so that can be a bit of an issue on those very highest diamond ranks. But still, Arcane Hunter, old deck, but still performing well. At number 11 we have something new again, enabled by the patch, Mining Rogue. Yeah, so you're going to excavate, you're going to generate a bunch of resources, you're going to generate a bunch of cards that did not start in your deck, a bunch of cards from other classes, and then you're trying to assemble your wing condition from there. And now Mining Rogue is effective enough that it can really get this job done. You have Shadow Shambler so that your death rattle things are just going to die instantly. So you have a Scourge Illusionist that's going to pull your Drillita kit, and then you can excavate and you can excavate, and then you can use all sorts of randomly generated resources. Mining Rogue is very popular right now, but it's not super strong actually. What Mining Rogue has going for it is that it doesn't have a lot of bad matchups either. It's very close to 50-50 in most of its matchups because it's very unpredictable. It can win or it can lose. Well, anything can happen. Its main weakness is Dragon Druid, but it also doesn't have any super strong matchups. Some players do like this kind of playstyle because that means that you're not victim of matchmaking, victim of polarization. You go into a game and hey, you have a chance to win that. But overall, the win rate of Mining Rogue is rather mediocre. Number 10, we have Aggro Paladin. I'm going to follow the current HS replay nomenclature here. They have changed it a little bit because this Aggro Paladin is actually the Showdown Paladin of 2 weeks ago. Nothing has really changed. This is exactly what Showdown Paladin was. Not the Aggro Paladin, which was even more on that Horn of the Windlord and buffs on that Horn of the Windlord, and this doesn't have that stuff. So this is just Showdown Paladin in its current state, and it's not terrible. It actually even has one really good thing going for it, which is that it's strong against Druid, and there's Treant Druids, there's Dragon Druids, there's Highlander Druids, and Aggro Paladin. Yeah, you can take on any of those Druids and be fine. However, against the rest of the field, the nerfs did have an effect. Paladin lost its edge, and now it's much more 50-50 matchups, a whole bunch of matchups where it's unfavored, where it wasn't before, and that means that overall Paladin performance is not exactly top tier anymore, even though it has some really nice matchups, especially against those Druids. And pretty much the exactly same thing applies to number 9, Earthen Paladin, which is now stronger of the two Paladin variants. This is now slightly stronger than the Showdown Paladin, an interesting change in that regard. They have both suffered similar kinds of fate. They have lost some edges that they previously had. They both remain good against Druids, although Earthen Paladin is weak against Highlander variant of Druid, although it's strong against the other variants of Druid. But Earthen Paladin has fewer overall weaknesses in the current meta, and still those strong Dragon Druid and Treant Druid matchups, which are more important than Highlander Druid anyway. So Earthen Paladin still a fine choice for climbing the ladder. At number 8, we have Nature Shaman. Nature Shaman, I'm a little bit reserved about Nature Shaman. Nature Shaman is one of those decks that's quite difficult to play because you're just trying to build up your turn with the bioluminescence, and then you have the spell damage, and then you're going to blast. And it's not a very simple playstyle. So Nature Shaman, even though its performance ratings are actually looking quite good at the moment, but it's also showing a tendency that it performs better in higher ranks, so it's kind of a high skill cap deck, and high skill cap decks typically are still not the best possible decks in the game. But with some reservations, I can recommend Nature Shaman to be used, and it's the strongest Shaman archetype that you can play at the moment. The other Shaman archetypes that you could consider are Totem Shaman, which is still around. It's still actually at 50.5% or something. It's still at around 50%. Totem Shaman just does not die, hasn't changed at all either. And then there is the Highlander Shaman. Highlander Shaman is a little bit above 50% as well, but doesn't look nearly as good as Nature one. And at number 7, we have our first Druid deck, and there's plenty of Druid decks here because there are 3 viable Druid archetypes, and this is the weakest Druid archetype, the Highlander Druid. And Highlander Druid has evolved a little bit actually. Not many decks have evolved that much, but this one has, because duplicates are finally out. Yeah, it turns out that if you have a Reno deck and you don't run duplicates, then your Reno is active more than it is when you run duplicates. It did look for a while that running 2 copies of Nourish is optimal for Highlander Druid, as mind-boggling as that seemed, but now that has been cut and the deck does look like it's better off because of that. But it's still the weakest Druid deck, which is not bad. If you want to play a Druid deck and you want to be a little bit surprising, then this could be something that you could try. But there are also other Highlander lists that you can try if you want to play Highlander on the ladder. Actually quite a few of these, because there was the Highlander Blood Death Knight, and then there's Highlander Druid, and then there's Highlander Shaman could be an option, Highlander Hunter. Highlander Hunter has not evolved at all, no card changes over the past 2 weeks. It just has the Hunter early game, so sometimes it has pressure already there, and then it has an endless stream of big bombs and Reno Lone Ranger for the late game, and that just makes it a pretty strong deck. And at number 5 we have the better Rogue deck. Yeah, Mining Rogue is getting all the attention, there are so many Mining Rogues around, but Mech Rogue quietly is still actually the stronger Rogue deck. And it has not changed at all. It's still the same mechs, then there's the Scourge Illusionist, and then you have Thunderbringer, and Thunderbringer can pull Neptulon and Krakatoa and some of those mech beast things that you also have in your deck. And Mech Rogue, if you let it snowball, it snowballs, and it still wins games. And as you have noticed, there are a bunch of Highlander decks on the ladder right now, and if there's Highlander decks on the ladder, there's going to be Plague Death Knight on the ladder as well, shuffling those plagues in their deck, filling the deck with duplicates, making the Highlander deck suffer. Yeah, that's the Plague Death Knight game plan. Plague Death Knight has hybridized completely with the excavation package. It's plagues and excavations. That is the ideal way to build this deck, but no 7-cost Oxen here, also no infinitely resurrecting skeletons, just the good old Plague Death Knight. Running that Hardcore Cultist. Some people had cut Hardcore Cultist already. I have recommended running Hardcore Cultist all the time. I think it has been the right option constantly, and now with Treant Druid on the ladder, it's definitely the right option to give you a bit more of a play in that matchup as well. And number 3 is a bit of a surprise. It's Control Warrior. Yeah, there's 2 kinds of Control Warriors on the ladder. There's the 30 card list, which is pretty much the same old, and then there is this newer Prince Renatal, 40 cards, includes a bunch of excavation cards in it, and this one seems to be the stronger Control Warrior deck. It's actually quite clearly the stronger Control Warrior deck, and it looks quite competitive on the ladder. And another peculiarity of the current meta, even this Control Warrior is not favored against Treant Druid. Yeah, I mean, Control Warrior, seriously, Control Warrior, that's like it's like the classic control deck that should really beat board-based aggro decks like Treant Druid, but it doesn't. It just doesn't, which is really curious. But even though that matchup is not so great, Control Warrior is having a good time on the ladder at the moment, and is one of the best decks that you can play. But the 2 best decks are Druid decks. Coming in at number 2, we have Dragon Druid. Nothing has changed. This is exactly the same list that I recommended 2 weeks ago. It's still a perfectly fine list. Just use your dragons, get overwhelming advantage with those dragons, buff them up, dragon golems, Malygos, and just beat stuff up. You're still weak against Paladin, but now far fewer Paladins, because Paladin has lost so much in other matchups that weakness doesn't matter nearly as much at the moment. And the same applies to Treant Druid. This is also the same list that I recommended 2 weeks ago. Yeah, nothing much has changed. It's also a super budget list, only a few rares and then commons, no epics, no legendary cards, really cheap deck, and currently the best deck on the ladder, because this is an aggro deck and it's just so fast and it's so hard to get off the board. And there's stuff coming on the board, then there's Soul of Forest on those minions, then there's Cultivation giving them more health so that you cannot remove them with damage space removal, so what are you even going to do? And then it's just going to roll over you. And the best deck in the game at the moment, Treant Druid, so the meta has really changed, and this is probably the cheapest best deck that Hearthstone has seen in many years. So if you're a free-to-play player, you can play the best deck in the game, and that's Happy New Year from Hearthstone. Thank you for watching. Click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and a special thanks to all of my Patreon supporters, YouTube members and Twitch subscribers who make all of these videos possible.